So I realize I don't have any League of Women Voters swag, but imagining I'm putting my League of Women Voters hat on today. And this is exactly what we're doing. We are expecting excellence and we are acting together. So I'm so grateful to share this space. It is so bizarre to host a panel virtually, but we're so used to this now. I just want to share this space of real talk. For those of you who know me, you know that I just really love real talk. And I look forward to sort of generating a thoughtful conversation on this really critical topic during this really critical time. So for the past 2 years of the pandemic, and as of this week and this month, we can actually say 2 years. You have all the superintendents on this call today have really led through this pandemic that has upended teaching and learning and has really exacerbated the challenges in teaching and learning that the Wilmington Learning Collaborative seeks to address. So first, I just want to say thank you for the 24/7 work that you have done, because every single thing that could have happened, gone wrong, that is unexpected has in the last 2 years. And you've really, now I'm looking at nobody except the collaborative, but I just want to say that you are really just maintaining inspiration and commitment. And just thank you for the 24/7 work. Without sitting in your position, it's really impossible to imagine all the work that you've all done. So to start, for the viewers on the line today, I want to just look at 2 slides. This is a deck that the governor's team and John Sheehan today has put together, because I want to look at the why and the possibility of this collaborative, just as a grounding mechanism, and then we will get into some questions. So if you wouldn't mind going to the slide that says current challenges. There we go. Can everybody see that? Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm going to not read the slide, but I just want to read the headings here. Fragmented governance, low achievement rates, high absenteeism, movement between schools and districts, recruitment and retention of educators, and the maintenance and conditions of our facilities. I just want to pause there. Everybody absorb that. And then let's please move to the possibility. What could a collaborative look like? There we go. Who participates? Elementary and middle schools in Wilmington. Voluntary, Coalition of the Willing. Targeted supports. Empowerment. Educators and leaders with shared decision makings, community councils. These are things that are just so critical. Flexibility, funding flexibility, decision making flexibility, school-based decision making, collaboration, cross-district collaboration, which is why we're really here today. And then of course the schools remain in their regular school districts. So let's all just take a second to absorb this. All right, let's return to the gallery view, please. Oh, fantastic. So I want to start with the first question, and I'm going to ask every panelist to share their answer to this question in 30 seconds or less. And then I will move to the next question, and I will sort of start with one panelist, and then please the rest of you just join in and we'll generate a conversation. If I interrupt you, it's just because I'm focusing on equity of voice and sort of trying to get to the breadth of questions that we have today. And we will keep 10 minutes at the end for questions that'll come in through the chat. And finally, we're going to finish with one word from each panelist of how everybody is sort of feeling about this initiative and also about our time together today. All right, let's begin. The first question, and why don't we start with Mr. Sheehan, okay? 30 seconds, John, and you know I'll cut you off. What does this collaborative mean to you and the families that you have in mind when you thought of this?
Sure. Well, thanks, Larissa, and thanks, Kathleen and the League for hosting this really important forum. This, in my mind, is an opportunity to create a system that empowers those closest to children, families, educators, communities, and a chance to really leverage and trust in those who are known in the community, who live in the community, who are in front of children every day, and really empower those closest to children. So I think that means a lot to me as a former classroom teacher, as you mentioned, to empower and trust those who are on the ground in front of children every single day.
John, your words are reverberating around everybody else. Thank you. Superintendent Green.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Larissa, and thank you to the league as well for hosting this forum. I guess what it means to me is it's an extension of the work that I've committed my life and the 20 plus years that I've been in education, and both supporting the city of Wilmington, families within the city of Wilmington, and beyond. And it's an opportunity to potentially remove a lot of the systemic and institutional barriers that have limited the success for our children and families for generations now. So as we engage in this work, it's an opportunity to hopefully break down some of those institutional and generational barriers that have impeded the opportunity and access gap that so many of our students and families experience on a daily basis.
Thank you. I already feel amazingly inspired, and we've only just begun. Superintendent Holer. I see you there. Can you, there you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna echo some of the sentiments that Mr. Green just expressed. I came aboard in Brandywine 30 years ago, and my first placement was a sixth grade teacher at Harlan Elementary. And I was at Harlan for many years, progressed through the ranks, eventually became principal at Harlan. Shortly thereafter, I became principal at P.S. DuPont. So those are my two principalships that I have in my hip pocket. And obviously it ties me very close to the city of Wilmington and its residents, even though Brandywine has a system in place where our city students go to multiple schools. I can say that in those two placements, the majority of my students were city students. So I see firsthand an opportunity to really impact and really make a difference for the educational outcomes for our city students.
Absolutely. Mr. Simmons. Jim, I can't see you, but I know you're here. There you are.
I'm here. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I think certainly all the statements that you've heard, I agree with. And I think if I had to truly answer that question in 30 seconds or less, it would be around prioritized opportunity. I think that there's been a lack of opportunity provided for some of our students, particularly our students of color, and particularly our students of color living in the city. And to be able to provide a system, amongst other things, that will, is being developed with giving them or seeing them as a priority means a great deal to me in this opportunity.
Fantastic. And Superintendent Shelton.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having us here today. Happy to participate. I think, again, echoing a lot of the comments that have already been said, I'll try to expand somewhat differently. All three of the superintendents here have been educators in the city. This is our passion. And for Christina School District, it's really expansion of the work that we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years around Christina Wilmington Schools Plan, already in partnership with the state. And this allows us to add additional partners and really ensures equitable access for all the students in Wilmington. We're proud of the work that we've done in the last 2 years, despite a pandemic, in expanding services supports, making huge gains in teacher retention. So this allows us to add additional partners to that, new focus, new resources, to ensure that these are going to be successful programs for all.
Thank you, Superintendent Shelton. So we've really, thinking of everything that they just said, and there's a real commitment to acknowledging that there are institutional barriers to access for schools and educators and students and leaders in our city. And you know, a lot of the sentiment of this community building is removing those barriers. The question would be for Superintendent Green and Superintendent Shelton. You know, you have led your districts through 2 unbelievable years. What lessons will you take from this experience into the design of the collaborative?
So I will say it's been 3 and feels like 21.
Okay.
So
Okay,
I
3, not
actually
2.
started in March of 2019 as a superintendent of Red Clay. And again, I think the pandemic, as we all know, has just kind of exacerbated the inequalities and inequities that we already knew existed. I mean, I just think it really put a hyper focus and a spotlight on the things that our children and families experience on a daily basis and continue to experience in a more hyper focused way. I think, again, this aligns somewhat, albeit we may have a different means to the same end. Really looking at a collaborative approach that I've always found success in my experiences in leading, whether that's the digital divide, whether that's the trauma, the resilience of our community. And I think that's the other thing that I see it from an asset base, because we're dealing with a resilient community that too often we come from a glass half empty perspective, not realizing how can we build upon, you know, the parental community, relative caregiver supports. You know, a lot of our children are being raised by relative caregivers, grandparents, great grandparents, community providers and systems. And how do we look at equitable educational outcomes and own the fact that our schools serve as hubs for resources and supports far beyond just the academic lens. I see some of our partners actually on here, you know, and one of the things that we took a keen interest in is most folks looked at learning loss, we looked at learning acceleration, and really looking at the mobility gap and how do we look at data and data in an informed real-time fashion, not for a study, not for a thesis, not for a dissertation, but to inform practice. You know, how are we looking at rigor within the classroom, ensuring that our students are actually benefiting from, you know, authentic teaching and learning that's not only culturally responsive, but in a safe space where they actually have student voice. You know, we've elevated student voice in a way like I would say no other, really understanding that so much of what our students learned was through a life experience. And now how does that impact the classroom? So there's been a lot of lessons learned through this ongoing pandemic. You know, again, really looking at it not necessarily through the lens of an achievement gap, but more importantly, opportunity and access. You know, who had access to the various resources as a result of the pandemic, and you know, how do we continue? We were fortunate early on to kind of have a one-to-one technology platform, but we had to accelerate that to ensure that not just every home had a device, but every child. And that's a necessity now. And it's not a nice to have. And the technology is one of many examples. So again, a lot of lessons learned, but I don't think it really uncovered anything that we didn't already know existed in the system. It just kind of put it in hyper focus. And now we have to be intentional and unapologetic about meeting those needs moving forward.
I'm going to take note of your words, intentional and unapologetic, because I think we all do well to remember those with all the work of the now and the work, you know, over the next few years. Superintendent Shelton, would you like to answer? Do you want me to repeat the question, or you're all right?
I'm good.
Okay.
So I won't, so just so everybody on the call knows, we all work very closely together amongst all the Newcastle County chiefs, not all of which are represented today. So I won't repeat a lot of the stuff that I was writing down for myself. I won't repeat. Let me just add a little bit that it's, I think one of the benefits that came out was we've had a focus in education on kind of the whole child approach for many years now. I think it brought that focus to a broader audience, that a wider audience now recognize not only the need to focus on whole child supports in school, but also in the community, that the community supports were necessary for us to be successful in schools. And I think a larger audience sees that now. In addition, it's not just health and wellness of our students, but also health and wellness of our staff, became something that, again, we always knew about, but it became a broader. Trauma is in our communities, and it gets reflected in our schools. So I think there's a broader audience now that understands that. So SEL in this new collaborative, I think will be a very important part of it. How do we ensure a safe, supportive learning environment for our students? That's culture responsive, that has that meets the needs not just of the students, but of the families. Because if the family is struggling, the student's going to struggle when they get here. The other thing, Darrell touched on the technology. It's not just about technology, right? If you just give the kids a device, that doesn't necessarily change it. One of the things that we're going to have to look at as we go forward, and the pandemic really jump-started and kicked off for us, is helping our teachers move into a modern learning environment. So as we go, our students move into that modern learning environment sometimes faster than our teachers. So it's something that we absolutely have to focus on, is giving our students that modern learning environment that maybe is a blended approach and isn't the traditional classrooms of yesteryear.
Would anybody like to jump in, any other panelists to that, to build upon that?
I'd like to speak to it if I could.
Absolutely.
A couple of key points that both Darrell and Dan brought out were the collaboration that exists currently between Newcastle County superintendents. And while I'm sure that kind of collaboration existed in previous superintendents, I looked it up right before we got on this morning. Our Secretary of Ed was one of the founding fathers of a group called the Brink. And it's at that point when it was formed, it stood for Brandywine, Red Clay, Indian River, and Newcastle County Votech, and Colonial. And those districts came together around a federal grant being written about instructional technology and blended learning. And it forced those districts to come together and do something that was never done previously in districts around the state of Delaware, and that was share playbooks. We shared strategies, we shared curriculum, we shared assessments, and up until that point, if it was Brandywine's, we held it under lock and key. We didn't share it with anybody. And the founding philosophy of that Brink Consortium was, together, we can better serve all students. And that took a bold approach on behalf of those founding superintendents, because our boards are pretty intense around choice and bringing people in and staying competitive. But yet those superintendents, and again, Dr. Holodick is the only current serving superintendent that started that collaboration, rolled up their sleeves and said, we're going to do whatever it takes to better serve kids. And if that means sharing playbooks, sharing strategies, curriculums, assessment, we're going to do it. And I sit here and I look at Dan. It wasn't too much down the road where Dan learned of Brink and brought Capital on board. APO's been brought on board, and it has expanded across the state. And to me, knowing Darrell, who was part of Brink, Dan was part of Brink, I was part of Brink, and that sharing of any resource, any knowledge base, instead of keeping it to yourself because it's a competitive system, is bodes so well for what we're trying to do with building this collaborative, a true collaborative where those items are shared. But I'll also like to focus on that term collaborative, because it's so much bigger than 3 districts. This collaborative is not going to work. We're not going to get the outcomes we want if it's just 3 districts focusing on that work. It is going to take external partners and agencies and organizations. It's going to take a collective effort and collaboration on the parts of those communities. And we've got to make sure that as this message is shared, that we make that perfectly clear, that this is so much bigger than just 3 school districts coming together in the best interest of kids. It's our collective community coming together.
Thank you. I'm just writing down a note here about the best interest of kids, because later on we should really say, how do each of you, what does success look like for each of you? I don't want to jump there right now, but that is something just to keep in your mind as we proceed. Question next, collaborative models, which is a really sort of picks up on your point, Superintendent. What collaborative models have you led in your districts that have really built a community of learning that have led to the outcomes that you intended when you initiated them? They could be small, they could be large. And then what sort of stands out to you as bits and pieces of that you could then apply to the design of the collaborative? Who would like to grab that question? Anybody?
I'll jump in just because I was a principal during some of that brink time that Link referred to, but more importantly, the one thing that we did together at that time was those initial PLCs. That was before it was state mandated, and we did it across content area in buildings, eventually doing it across content areas in districts, and the impact that it saw around planning for teachers, professional development for teachers, common assessments, and looking at data. And so that small piece, or I shouldn't call it small, that at a smaller scale is something that I think can be applied to this collaborative to feedback off of what the other superintendents have said.
That's helpful. See, I think something's happening with the screen here. There we go. Thank you, Jim. Anybody else want to jump in with, it doesn't need to be in the last 2 years, but sort of collaborative models that in your mind, you've all been educators and leaders for so long, you have sort of ideologies and things that you've really put together that I'm imagining you would like to contribute to this design.
I think that Brink is a great example, so I won't repeat it, but I think that was perfect lead into your question. I'd also add that, I think all of us have probably done some strategic planning work in the past. I did now in 2 different districts, some strategic planning work, and I highlight that not for the planning itself, but for the purpose, right? So the purpose in both engagements was voice, that we needed to have multiple stakeholders' voices. And in Capital, we were super successful with that, and actually are building a brand new school because of it, and have very targeted approach, which I think is part 2 of that, right? Is through some of these processes that we've all been a part of over the years, we know that we can't try to swallow the whole apple at once, right? You got to bite at the apple 1 bite at a time. And if you try to take on too much, you choke, you don't get it down. But if you can bite off some of the really important parts, you're going to see greater success. And also recognizing what are the parts not to, right? Because, if you bite into the core, it's going to stop your progress. So you got to make sure you're doing the things that are going to really have an impact.
Would you then, to that point, say that designing this collaborative is part of the apple or the core? Because we don't want it to be part of the core, right?
I see it as both, right? We need to make sure that we're not trying to the first year take the whole thing, right? We want to make sure the things that we're selecting and the initiatives that we're focused on are the things that are going to help us make progress, and not try to bite into the core or try to take the whole thing at once. We got to make sure that we're going to make iterative progress so that we actually make change.
I think to Superintendent Green's point, though, we're entering this with the idea of removing institutional and systemic barriers, not let's start to do a little thing over here and a little thing over there. This is sort of an evidence-based intervention that we're talking about. Superintendent Green, did you want to add to that, just with especially your learnings over the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, I'll just actually start from the premise of my own experience, which, ultimately leads how and influences how I lead, right? And so learning truly is an experience. Everything else is information. And so my question is ultimately, what are we doing to provide an experience for our young people and their families who otherwise that's not transactional in nature, but that's also going to, again, elevate a community. So when you think about, everyone might be familiar with it when we talk about a community schools model, right? And ultimately, if you look at bringing various stakeholder groups, cross-sector partnerships, that being, the nonprofit, for-profit, philanthropic, faith-based, all of the various, sectors that impact the community. How do they integrate and work on behalf of this current generation of children and those who are to follow? And I could think of, Dr. James Calmer, who has a Calmer model based out of Yale, which was something that I experienced because, just taking the example, and I know, Larissa, we had this conversation Saturday at one of the listening sessions at the warehouse, right? When we talk about field trips, we heard our young people, the young students there, indicate if we had to put something in place and they were in high school and they said the last time they had an experience, which they felt was an authentic learning experience, is when they were in middle school. And so how do we, not assume that children have background knowledge or are going to come with background knowledge and teach them solely from a textbook and really look at experiential learning? Understanding, and I know someone mentioned, I think it was Superintendent Shelton, Dr. Shelton mentioned, understanding that we have to provide that familial support as well, if it's a new curriculum or new reading series. So really looking at how do we structure this in a way, we look at the whole child, but we look at it from an experiential learning premise and not this transactional, typical process of we're going to deliver curriculum and content and teach it to students, and students are going to grasp it and they're going to move on and be successful in life. Well, let's really look at it from an altruistic standpoint of schools are about experiences and opportunities. And if we provide students with relevant opportunities that's based in rigor and a culture of high expectations, success will follow. And that's always been my experience in leading successful initiatives and programs that has cross-sector partnerships, and much of what's outlined in this this collaborative. But we have to do it in an authentic way because we're also talking about a community that has seen proposal after proposal, reform effort after reform effort, and not really seen any sustainable change over the years. And that's both, within district initiatives as well as statewide or other community-based initiatives. So we have to be conscious about not just hearing voice, but putting that voice into action and helping our community develop agency so there can be some self-sufficiency and sustainability with any kind of program that we put in place.
I think I just want to let those words really, really sink in as the spirit of what we're moving towards right now. And on that, if anybody else wants to jump in, I just wanted to move to when you speak about the collaborative, the design, sort of the design principles so far. One of the most salient features is this idea of school-based decision-making and teacher-led decision-making. In my personal experience, working with so many teachers in a lot of different types of schools, teachers know what their students sitting right in front of them need, and they need to be able to have the agency to work towards that, whatever kinds of supports that requires, and need to be supported to deliver those types of supports. So who would like to jump in and say, we've got school-based decision-making, we have school leader-based funding, which is really, really different decision-making around how money should be spent, per school and based on individual school plans. In your experience, what do you think of these ideas would be sort of most doable, and which would be the heaviest lifts, considering these schools are not detached from the districts in which they are linked? Who would like to grab that question? And by the way, there are no red herrings here. This is really a generative conversation.
Can I start, Larissa?
Yeah, sure.
It sort of answers a few of the questions you asked then and then before. Back in 2017, Darrell, myself, and a few others visited a model that is similar to what we are proposing here in Springfield, Massachusetts. And I think the most impactful part of that was a conversation that we had with what they call their teacher leader team. And it's a group of educators who are empowered to work with the school leader on decision-making at the school level. And then again, this past December, we held a virtual visit with a few different models, and there was a representative from the teacher leader team who was there. And the empowerment that they shared in being entrusted to help make decisions that their students need, I think truly in both visits was what I came away with inspired by, is that these are folks who as you said, are in front of children every single day and know what barriers exist that stand in the way of their students. And so I think that piece of it is so inspiring to me. And when you mentioned what is doable, I think that this is a structure that we can build out pretty quickly, is this shared decision-making model and this creation, and to Superintendent Shelton's point, building on some of the work that Christina started with those educator leader teams. I think that's absolutely critical, and it's something that can be done right away. And I would encourage folks, I'll drop it in the chat, but we have a website, de.gov/WLC, and it's where you can find a lot of the information about the collaborative, and you can actually watch the virtual visit, and you can hear from educators. And at the end, we had a representative from NEA come and talk about shared decision making and the data behind this. So it makes sense, I think, from a common sense perspective, but they actually have data to show that when you have that shared decision making, that it improves retention, improves student achievement, improves working conditions. And so it's in my mind an amazing opportunity that we can start pretty quickly. And so it's one of the things that excites me most about this.
Absolutely. Anybody want to pick up on that, sort of what is most doable in terms of the ideologies around this collaborative, and what do you see as the heaviest lift as leaders in your district?
I would just push back or use some words of caution around the teacher leadership piece. While it's absolutely essential to establish that buy-in, I also think it has to be carefully, strategically done, carefully moderated, because often you can't see as a practitioner what you're missing. You need sometimes somebody from the outside to come in and do an evaluation and help you discover what you can't see. It's like when my wife asked me to get the ketchup out of the fridge, and I'm standing there and I can't see the ketchup, and it's right in front of me. I think back to Mr. Simmons when he was principal at Mount Pleasant High School, and that school not making AYP, and arguably had one of the poorest reputations, I would say, in Newcastle County in terms of high school. But between a consistent effort with staff buy-in, but outside experts coming in saying, here's areas of focus that are targeted, explicit, and then establishing realistic goals around taking measurable steps towards that progress. Jimmy would celebrate those incremental steps that were made, and the enthusiasm and the belief of the staff that this is doable grew every single time one of those achievement goals was hit. So it was, in fact, trying to get the staff to believe in themselves and to get students themselves to believe in the growth that can be made. And the best part of Mr. Simmons' work was that student achievement grew, and not because of the IB program that was at Mount. The gains were actually from the lowest performing students, exactly where they needed to be. And I had to write the final evaluation piece around that SIG-G grant that Mr. Simmons was in charge of at Mount. And I remember writing, one of the questions was, how do you know that this SIG-G grant was a success? Well, we had ample data to prove it was a success, but I wrote that we won't know that for another 3 to 4 years, because we wanted to see institutional change, not flash in the pan, not because we got some extra resources because of the grant, but did we make an institutional change in practice that would be continued well past that? And I just had the pleasure of making that comment to the principal at Mount Pleasant High School 2 years ago, when I want to say they were first or second in the state for traditional comprehensive public high schools in SAT scores. And again, that doesn't happen because you have a specialized program like IB. That success is all students. And so it's a definite teacher buy-in, but also an outside expert looking at and suggesting things that need to happen. So I think it's that careful, moderated, strategic, balanced approach of making that happen.
One thing that you're pointing out that I know that John Sheehan and I talk about all the time, especially in the last 3, 4, 5 months, is this sense of possibility. And I'm hoping that that is what, as we carry forth with everybody, families, community members, people have sort of a continued commitment to a sense of possibility for what this could be, for what we need it to be, whatever that turns out to be. Would anybody else like to lean in and answer this sort of, what do you think will be the heaviest lift as well as the most doable aspect of sort of the design thinking around this?
I'll just add something real short. So I think all of us have tried our best throughout the years to have site-based decision-making. You know, as a principal, every building I was at, that was kind of one of the starting points. And one of the issues with people feeling as though site-based decision-making wasn't being fully acted upon is to get, Darrell talked about thinking about asset approach. So I want to flip your question. Not what's going to be hardest, but what barrier have we removed? And that is a lot of times what people in site-based decision-making struggle with is there's not a resource to pay for the idea, right? And the site doesn't have the ability to generate that resource. So one of the things that's going to come out of this potentially is additional resources that aren't yet targeted, right? They don't have a place they have to be spent yet. So as sites develop these great ideas, there is a resource to try to implement them. And then to Link's point, we then have to then look at them from an outside lens and say, was it successful? Was it not successful? Decide if we're going to continue it or not. But I think that's a barrier that we're going to remove because we're starting from it's not already in place. We have to get rid of something to add something, but there's resources that haven't been targeted yet. Let's put them where we think at the site level, they think they would be most effective.
Exactly. And then let's make sure they stay able to be targeted in the way that the school wants, not just sort of start peeling them off. Thank you for that. Just last question before we open it up to some questions, then I'm going to ask everybody to make a commitment at the end. What role do you anticipate the Department of Ed, our universities, and our families playing in the construct and the sustainability of the collaborative? Considering it is called a collaborative. Anyone?
Well, I guess our families are front and center, right? And I guess what's the willingness on all of the other partners to operate from that premise that this is about children and families and not necessarily about the overall organization or the organization itself. And what are we willing to do, again, in this partnership, in this collaborative, to ensure that sustainability is you know, baked into this cake, so to speak, to ensure that not just the current students who are sitting in Warner, Lewis, Shortland, or Highlands, but the ones who are yet to come, and that everyone will be committed to staying at the table. Because I think with all of the, you know, reform efforts and initiatives, especially for those that might be potentially grant funded, they sunset. And so to Dan's point, you know, you build success, whether that was the SIG program that Mr. Simmons led at Mount Pleasant High School, whether that was when Highlands was a priority school, whether that was when I was at Harlan or when I served at Bayard as a K-6. You know, when those quote unquote funds go away, you know, so does the success. Or how are we building capacity to ensure that teacher leaders and a pipeline is a part of this process? Because I think too often success goes as the leader goes. And so you create a void or vacuum every time I pull a educator out of the classroom, you know, to go into administration. Now I have to try to find someone to backfill that educator. And is there a viable pipeline? And so our universities and higher ed institutions committed to continue to support that. And we have some strong partnerships now when we look at the teacher residency program that we have currently in place. Dell State, albeit centered in Dover, is increasing their footprint to be statewide. But we have partners. I see several partners who are on this call as well. We currently have a partnership with TNTP. I see Jack Perry on here, who has provided that objective lens of work that we're doing. And so when we looked at our learning loss analysis in the pandemic, we realized that mobility, and not mobility in terms of a transient population, but mobility for Black and Brown, Hispanic students and students with disabilities, the longer that they were staying in red clay, the wider our achievement gap was actually becoming. So that's a very introspective look, that you got to look at the system from within and not always look outside of yourselves. So are we as a collaborative willing to look within? Because many of these partners have been in this game for generations and decades now. And so we can't look outside of ourselves to blame someone else. We got to look inside of ourselves and collectively to ensure that history doesn't continue to repeat itself for another generation or a group of students within Wilmington.
Thank you. I'm really moved by that. Does anybody want to add their own view of the role?
I think we should make a rule that Darrell has last say every time he speaks, because
I think so too. I don't know
he just nails it. I would add one thing. It's more than just talking the talk. We have to walk the walk. And I'm going to use a very real situation that's facing us right now. As a matter of fact, there's a state board meeting tomorrow night, and I don't want this to sound anti-charter school. However, one of the things that's been drawn out is the fragmentation that exists. We had brought that out. WEAC brought that out. Reading Consortium brings that out. The number of educational agencies that have their fingers in the pie for the city of Wilmington. And 2015, 2016, a moratorium was placed on opening charter schools in Newcastle County until a study could be done. That study did too point out the number of educational agencies. And I know we have a charter school seeking approval to be opened in Christina, not in the city, but remember, by sheer nature of a charter school, city students can elect, or it can affect schools that aren't in the city, but yet city children attend them in terms of their demographics. And, if that's going to be cited as something, then we have to embrace it as a group. Again, this is not the 3 districts. This is Department of Ed, Governor's Office, community, outside organizations, agencies, and we all have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And that's just one example that I can think of that, if we say that's an issue, then what are we doing about it? And approving additional elements to fragment things even further doesn't make sense if that's what the report has shown.
It's interesting. Thank you for that. We are, I remember a legislator recently said to me, we are a state of choice. We are. I mean, it's, our whole state has that, whether we agree with that or not, we have that sort of the foundation. And there are people on this call from other states, and it is pretty amazing how confusing it is if you come in here and you try to send your kids to so many different schools. It's really hard to figure out. Superintendent Holder, you just sort of led into the final question for everybody. So I'd like every panelist to answer this 2-part question, and then we'll open the floor for some comments. And you already kind of answered it yourself. One is, what is this really going to take, right? We can have a commitment and we can say gorgeous things, but what are we really willing to do so this structure looks different and gets to the outcomes that we are seeking? And 2, 5 years from now, put us out 5 years from now. What does success look like from this collaborative? John, would you like to start? What is it going to take right now? And what does success look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer them in reverse order. Success looks like a few things. Top of mind for the governor in so many conversations, making sure that we are preparing every child for the next step, and that really starts with teaching and focusing on literacy in the early years, and so making sure every single third grader is leaving third grade reading on grade level, because that ensures that all doors are open. So I think certainly it is wellness, it's student achievement and educator retention. And I also think there's a super quick story there in one of these models elsewhere. There was, similar to us, there was a lot of doubt and lack of trust from history of reforms. And I think while it's tough to sort of have a specific measurement, that aspect of trust and rebuilding trust is something that is massive. And we hear it at every community meeting. And so having folks have a trust in one another as we work together is critical. And I think that leads into the second question: what's it going to take? It's going to take us to trust one another and come to this with the mindset that this is possible and focus on what is indeed possible. So I appreciate the question greatly.
That's beautiful. Superintendent Shelton.
Thank you for putting me first, or second, I guess, first of the Chiefs. I think John hit a lot of it, but obviously student achievement is one of our focuses, but also stability of the student. So I think that's going to be critical. Those are things you hope to see 5 years from now: school stability, student stability, and achievement. What's it going to take? I think the title is really good, right? It's collaborative, right? We're going to have to all work together, and it's not just the schools. It's state agencies, it's partners, it's community groups, it's families. We all have to work together if we're going to make it successful.
Thank you. Jim.
I'll echo that I don't have to follow Darrell. So there's certainly metrics around academia that we think that all of us should throw out, but I think those are all givens, right? We all want to see proficiency rate and student achievement grow and those sort of things. So those are the easy ones to say. And so when I think about the question, as I was thinking about the question, I think what it's going to take is that ongoing introspection around, I'll use school improvement or school improvement plans that we often had to write. I think it's got to be the concept that those are living documents, that we're not only are we collaborating at the beginning to build it, that it's ongoing collaboration. And so that we continually get together to look and collaborate and say, let's tweak this, let's tweak that, because what we thought might work and that we all agreed on in 2022, may not be working as well as we thought. So in the fall, let's not just keep doing something because we agreed with it in April. Let's look at it again in November and say, let's tweak this, let's adjust this so that it's a living and breathing collaboration that's ongoing. And what does it look like in 5 years? Exactly like it looks like right now, that we're continuing to have those ongoing conversations, hoping that the data is moving in the right direction, but we're keeping those discussions going, because the ultimate goal isn't the proficiency rate. The ultimate goal is the delta of the proficiency rate, right? Like I was giving compliments on what I did at Mount Pleasant. So thank you, Link, and thank you, Darrell, who were huge parts of that as well. I certainly didn't do it by myself, but one of the things that we always talked about was when we were 73% proficient, we were also 27% not proficient. And so as long as we're continuing to work on that, that's what I'd like to see in 5 years. So thank you for the question.
That's beautiful. And Superintendent Holer, and we're going to end with, by request, end with Superintendent Green.
It's going to require additional resources, and we know that's going to mean human capital based on some of the preliminary discussions. So I'm going to say it's a key factor. This is the number of pediatric cardiologists we have on staff 5 years from now. And it might seem a funny term, but I fully believe that it takes a special heart, someone who works through the child's heart in order to hit the brain. And that takes a special individual who is passionate and dedicated to children, but understands the children and their environment that will be worked with in this collaborative. It requires a special individual. So we've got work to do in recruiting what I'm going to call pediatric cardiologists, because they have to have the ability to work on a child's heart.
You know, it is true what you say, because this isn't the same thing, and we can't look at it as same thing, same skill set, same everything. That we're trying to tackle something different here. So I appreciate that. And Superintendent Green, no pressure, okay?
Yeah, no pressure at all. I think in the end, you know, and I'll just say what success looks like, and I'm gonna be transparent, whether there's a collaborative or no collaborative, I'm ultimately responsible for elementary schools within the city of Wilmington. And so they will be because we are a state of choice, they will be a choice destination for both students and staff to want to be a part of what we have going on in Red Clay. And that's what success looks like. And so those families who live in the Triangle, who live in Highlands, who live in, you know, parts of the city who generally don't send their children to their feeder schools will want to send their children to those feeder schools. We will have wait lists in all of our Wilmington schools, and we will have staff fighting to work in those schools, and parents will be happy. And that's the vision that I have for the work. And again, whether it's a collaborative or no collaborative, that's the ultimate goal, to create places and spaces where children and adults can thrive and grow together. And we can talk about the theory, we could talk about the research, we could talk about the evidence. I mean, we're educators by trade, but that's the ultimate goal and the ultimate vision. And that's going to take a collective, and the collective we that's sitting on this call, and others who are engaged with our children, our families, and our staff members across the board. So that's the ultimate goal.
I don't think we need anything else except the collective visions and the commitments that everybody has made today. Thank you so very much. Let's take one question to round us out here. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat. Does anybody have a particular question? Anybody?
We have one question in the chat, Larissa.
Okay. What is the vision for hybrid communications? Right. A lot of people actually have been asking, not that we're predicting another pandemic, but in terms of individualized learning plans, what works for particular families? Do we plan to have, as a collaborative, not really thinking about your own particular districts, but as a collaborative, do we plan to offer something like that or design that? Is that kind of on the table?
So I think as a society, we found the advantages of this, right? We're all sitting on a meeting right now. I don't know about anybody else, but I had one right before and right after, and I would have had to pick no more than 2 of the 3 meetings if it hadn't been for Zoom, right? I think you probably have a greater participation in this than you would have if we had been sitting, you know, in one of the hotels in the city of Wilmington. So this isn't going away. However, we have to pick and choose when to use it. So for example, there's been great strides in the potential for things we talked about in Brink, where, for example, at Dover High School, we had to drop Latin. There just wasn't enough students to support Latin. But the last year, we had a teacher who had been transferred to Germany. She taught the course for the last year as we phased it out. Well, courses like that are really low instance, we now have the opportunity to potentially partner as groups of districts and be able to offer a broader spectrum of low incidence coursework, so that we can support that coursework across the whole state, or whether it's Newcastle County or just the collaborative. So I think that this isn't going away. That's just a simple little example.
No, that's actually a really fascinating example, because it really opens up every possibility of learning with, experts can be anywhere. We don't need to be confined by sit in a chair, get direct learning. It doesn't need to be that way anymore, since we do really want to be growing problem solvers. One final word from every panelist, just shout out a word of the way that you're feeling right now about this venture going forward. John, let's start with you again, just because you're on the left of my screen. One word.
Hopeful.
Dan.
I was going to use hope. So
right.
Encouraging.
Okay. Jim.
Optimistic.
Link.
Optimisticer.
It's a competition. Darrell.
Commitment. I'm committed.
Committed. Awesome. Thank you, League. Thank you, participants, with so much appreciation to all of you. We'll see you very soon. We're holding you to it.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Larissa and panelists.